Hello. We're going to go over organizing and summarizing data a little bit today. So, the first thing we're going to look at is organizing qualitative data. And when you collect qualitative data, you typically are going to do that and just collect raw data. You don't do any organizing at all. Once you get the raw data, then you will organize it in some kind of table, and then you'll present it, usually in the form of a graph. Now, with qualitative data, it's typically a bar graph of some sort. Now, organizing it before you make the bar graph is usually done in a frequency distribution, which is basically just a chart. Here's an example of the process. So we've got a whole bunch of M&Ms. We dump them out, and we just sort them. Well, we don't really even sort them. We just pay attention to what they are. So this is an example of raw data. Once we get the raw data written down, we're going to put it in a frequency distribution table. So you can see we've got a column for category by color. We've got a column for frequency, how many there are. And in the middle, there's a tally column, which you may or may not have. But all frequency distribution tables have to have a category column and a frequency column. We can also add a relative frequency because oftentimes it's important to have more than just how many. A percentage or a decimal value may give us a better idea of the data, better understanding of the data. And you all know how to make those numbers. You just take how many you have and divide by the total number. So in this case, we would take our frequency table, we would count up how many we have, 12 plus 10 plus 9 plus 6 plus 3 plus 5, which turns out to be 45. And so now we can find the relative frequencies for each of the colors there. The decimal value that we use for relative frequencies is typically 3 or 4 decimal places, and you can see here they've used 4 decimal places. Now, once we have our frequency table and all the information we want on it, we're ready to decide what kind of graph we want. You have to pay attention to what you're graphing. Are we graphing a frequency or are we graphing a relative frequency? So graph A is a frequency bar graph and graph B is a relative frequency bar graph, and the only difference is the increments up the vertical side. So what we're going to have up the vertical side on this one is the frequency numbers. The graphs themselves will look just about identical. And in the next one, we'll use our relative frequency values as our increments up the side. And you can see here we go by 0.05 increments, but the shape of the graph is identical. So do pay attention to whether you're asked to draw a frequency bar graph or a relative frequency bar graph. Now, a Pareto chart is a bar graph. They just started with the tallest bar graph and worked their way down. I've not seen too many of those, but that's what a Pareto chart is. You can also do side-by-side bar graphs, and that's good when we're trying to compare time data. So in the next example, we'll see data from 1990 and data from a later year. And drawing a side-by-side bar graph makes comparisons very easy. So here's our data, and you can see by comparing the data that in 1990, the numbers were smaller by a lot in some cases, by a little bit in others, but that's much easier to see when you have it on a bar graph. Now notice that the categories here are fairly short: never married, married, widowed, divorced. If your categories have a long name, then you might be better off doing a horizontal bar graph instead. I'm not going to have you do pie charts. They're just a little bit more difficult to draw because many people don't have access to good tools to make them. If you're interested in drawing a pie chart, I'm certain you can look that up online and get that done. That's all I have today, so have a great day.